Hello, everyone, and welcome to our March 2026 iCare webinar. I'm Jeffrey, and this is Jada. We're your senior program coordinator for iCare. Today, we are going to have a presentation from some of our leads of the MaMS core. All right, so just some brief introductions here. Let's share. Alrighty, so our presenters. So first is going to be Dr. Kathleen Yost. Dr. Yost is a professor of health services research in the Division of Epidemiology, Department of Quantitative Health Sciences at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Her research interests include health literacy, survey methodology, and patient-reported outcome measurement. Dr. Yost was Dr. Yost has over 20 years of experience in outcome measure development and validation, and she has been the director of Mayo Clinic Survey Research Center since 2016. Her research focuses on using patient-centered questionnaires to measure experiences of illness and perceptions of healthcare received, with the overall goal of using the information to enhance patients' quality of life and improve quality of care. And then
All
our
right.
next presenter.
All right. So next up, we have Dr. Catherine Oladoyimbo. Dr. Oladoyimbo is an associate professor of public health nutrition at the Department of Nutrition and Dietetics, Federal University of Agricultural. Sorry if I butcher it, Abukutu, and a fellow of the African Women in Agricultural Research and Development, aka Award. Her expertise and leadership is in community public health nutrition, behavioral science, and implementation science. She is also the African Principal Investigator of the African Behavioral Center, aka the ABER Center, and the site PI for the Prostate Cancer Transatlantic Consortium, aka CAPCC.
And then last presenter, Dr. Mary Ellen Young. Dr. Young is Professor Emeritus at the University of Florida, College of Public Health and Health Professions. She is currently a qualitative methodological consultant at the Mayo Foundation for Education and Research and a member of the iCARE MAMS Corps. Dr. Young uses grounded theory and mixed methods to model the experience of disease and disability. She believes that disability is part of the universal human experience and that healthcare and community based services to improve function and societal integration are basic human rights. She believes that holistic research methods are key to understanding the diverse experiences of people with chronic illness and disability, and that qualitative research gives voice to those impacted by health disparities. She positions herself in the transformative frameworks of constructivism, pragmaticism, action research, and social justice. So, with that, we will go ahead and welcome our presenters.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Yes, I'm Kathleen Yost, and I'll be starting off the presentation today. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so the methodology measure service MaMS core. What we're going to talk about today is our research toolkit. So we did present in a webinar a few years ago, maybe a year and a half ago. So this is an update and just a reminder of the core as it is a service for other iCARE investigators. So first, we'll talk about our team. So the three leads are going to be presenting different topics today. We have several members, Dr. Opiemi Bolajoko, Uju Aliche, Abebi Asanyabi, Towimo Paimo, and Senator Hill is our ad hoc member from the community. Timothea Bonner is our scientific oversight, and we're just recently switched our MPA liaison from Dr. Odedina to Dr. Ernest Kaninji. We meet monthly, and we're a very active core. So as a reminder of our mission, it's to support the development and use of best practices for research design, measures, and customized data collection for iCARE research projects. Our goals were to establish standard operating procedures tailored to iCARE population for research design, including development, validation, translation, implementation, and interpretation of qualitative and quantitative study measures. So that goal has been achieved. What we mainly do in phase 2, the bulk of our work is to review and consult on data collection approaches for iCCaRE pilot projects and full projects. We collaborate with the iCCaRE investigators to disseminate best practices on methodology and measures for studies of prostate cancer in Black men. So how can you engage with our core? The key thing to recall is that engagement early is really important. So please engage with us in the planning phase. If you contact MaMS right before submitting your protocol and materials to the IRB, it's too late. It really is important for us to be engaged early because we have a lot of comments. We're very active. We like to give a lot of feedback, and that can slow projects down if you're only getting that feedback at the time that you're hoping to get IRB approval. So engage us early. In terms of procedure, just send an email to Jeffrey instead of one of us, because it might get lost in our emails, and he'll help keep us on top of things. So send a message to Jeffrey, and he'll connect with us about review and consultation. Then for all projects, we assign a MaMS liaison to a project. The liaison roles and responsibilities include ensuring that the study team has the relevant MAM resources to guide the protocol and measure development. So we'll be going over the toolkit. It's pretty big toolkit. So the MaMS liaison will help sure that you have the measures that are relevant for your study. We advise on the data collection protocol. The liaison will serve as the lead reviewer of the study-related materials, although all of us will have a chance to review as a group. The liaison attends study meetings and is available throughout the project. So it's not just in the beginning. We want to be partners with you throughout the entire project and because questions can come up. Sometimes protocols have to deviate in the middle of the field. It's very common. We can assist with the interpretation of results and dissemination of your results, including presentations, peer-reviewed manuscripts, etc. So things that the liaison cannot do or does not do is we don't actually participate in the quantitative or qualitative data collection. So we won't actually facilitate focus groups, for example, or we won't actually design a survey for you, but we're more of an advisory or consulting role. The liaison or MaMS members will not do the actual quantitative or qualitative data analysis. Again, we're more of an oversight. We certainly can do those things, but that would involve engaging us as a co-investigator on the study and then providing FTE support for that role. So we are available for that if that's an interest to a MaMS member, but in general, what is covered as our MaMS membership is really just advisory on these things. The last thing that the liaison does not do is training the team on how to do qualitative or quantitative methods. Again, we're more of an advisory group. So for phase 2, this table shows all of the different projects. So the APPs, we've just given that title. It's additional pilot projects that were new in phase 2, and they're all focused in Africa. And we have identified liaisons for each of those. For those of you that have full projects, you probably already are familiar with your liaison. We're continuing those roles that were probably assigned in phase 1. And then we have another pilot project as well that we're working, pilot project 6 that we're working on as well. So if you haven't already engaged with your liaison or you're not sure who that person is, please reach out and make sure that they are in your invites for your regular meetings. So for the next of the presentation, we're gonna divide and conquer. So first, I'm gonna hand it off to Dr. Young to talk about all the resources available to you for qualitative research. Then I'll come back for quantitative research, and I will also give an overview of our standardized demographic and health questions. And then I will hand off to Dr. Oladiembo to talk about considerations for conducting studies in Africa.
Hello, welcome everybody. So I'm going to talk about the resources that have been developed for qualitative research. And we have 4 documents that will help you and serve as resources. And so I'm going to talk about these 4, the best practices for qualitative research, a checklist for qualitative research projects, focus group best practices, and writing interview or focus group guide questions for qualitative research. Next slide. So first, I've developed a document for best practices for qualitative research. It's a document that is not comprehensive. So if you don't have a background in qualitative research, it won't serve as that foundation. But if you do have a background in qualitative research, the best practices document should prove useful to you. Best practices are challenging because qualitative research has multiple approaches, and each approach has a different way of evaluating the quality of the research. A good qualitative study is one that is situated in a recognized qualitative approach, is ethical, explores a single concept, describes rigorous data collection and analysis procedures, and presents multiple layers of abstraction in the data analysis. Braun and Clark in 2024, there's a very comprehensive and extraordinary article that's kind of changing the landscape in qualitative research. And they distinguish between little q and big Q research. So small q is used to categorize qualitative research that remains based in a positivist empiricist tradition. So it may be an interview or a focus group that goes along with a survey or open-ended questions or things like that. They differentiate that from the big Q, which is the big qualitative, which is based in our qualitative research traditions of being non-positivist and looking at questions and areas where things can't be counted. They're more likely to be beneficial to describe them or to model them for theory. Next slide. So I've prepared a checklist for qualitative research projects for your use based on Tong et al. From 2007, and it's a 32-item checklist. And what we discovered is that several cancer journals have recently started asking authors to address each of the items in the checklist, even giving like the page number. All right. And so we wanted to use this framework to establish criteria prior to publication. So all the way back to the development of proposals and protocols, this checklist gives you an idea of what criteria will be used to evaluate your research if the journal is using Tong. If the journal's not using Tong, it still gives you a handle for evaluating your manuscript. Be sure and read the Braun and Clark challenge to Tong because this is where the discussion is going in our work. All right, next question. So focus group research is a special kind of research where you call in a group of people with certain characteristics, and the focus group is led by a skilled interviewer. Usually you try to have some homogeneity of characteristics in your focus group and have a small enough group for everyone to have the opportunity to share and large enough for a diversity of perceptions. For Mayo, we have developed 2 courses that are available for both leading a focus group. So focus group facilitators can go through and take that course, and then a broader look at the purpose of focus groups and how to handle the logistics of designing a focus group. Next slide. And finally, there's a resource guide for writing interview or focus group guide questions for qualitative research. And we use guides. And we use guides because the IRB needs to know what the actual questions are going to be and how those are connected to our research questions and meeting the requirements of informed consent. So when we use the guide, the interviewer or focus group facilitator might change the wording or order the questions to meet the language, understanding, needs, and context of the participants, but you still stick to the guide in its spirit. When you're writing questions, they should be of course, related to your research questions, but we usually start with broad, open-ended questions and follow up with probes as we get more specific about the things that we're interested in. And it's very important to have your interview guide or your focus group guide run it by your advisory board members, do pilot tests with advisory board members to make sure that it's relevant for cultural context and competency. All right, I'm going to give this back to Dr. Yost.
Great, thank you, Dr. Young. So for the resources for quantitative research, we have 3 documents. One is an overview, the criteria for methodology and measurement. There's also a checklist for quantitative surveys, and then a document on writing new questions for surveys. In all of these, when we think about best practices, I love to refer to the work by Groves. It's old, 2009, but it's still the foundation of what we do in research regarding surveys. So I want to draw your attention to the survey life cycle. I use this figure when I teach survey methods in the graduate school. So we can think about developing a survey as following a measurement path and a representation path. But what we're doing is we're creating a statistic, we're creating a number, we're creating brand new data, and we want that data to be as free of error as possible so that we have really high quality data. So when I think about you starting with a construct, which is an idea, you create a question to measure that idea, the person maps their response onto an option that you give them. You might edit it. For example, if there's branching logic and the person doesn't follow the branching logic, you may have to edit the responses after data collection. And then on the target population, there's all sorts of options for error to sneak in as well. So for the target population, which is the group you want to make inferences about, the sampling frame are people who are eligible to be part of your study. The sample is the actual group you reach out to. Then there's a subset of those who will participate. And then post-survey adjustment is if you want to do some statistical adjustment to better connect to the target population. And I think of these yellow ovals as error that can sneak in when the door is open. So as researchers that are using surveys, we want to try to close the door completely. And if we can't, we're going to close it as much as we can. And then finally, we want to be able to describe any error that might sneak in. We want to be able to be aware of it so we can describe it when we're disseminating our research as potential limitations that might influence our interpretation of those survey statistics. Another helpful diagram is just sort of the process, and that's the graph on the left here. And we can think about these as individual decision points to make. So when you define your objective, you have to then choose your mode of survey data collection. You also need to consider your mode of administration. I'm going to draft the questionnaires. How are you going to find the people? How are you going to select the sample? These are all the questions of how-tos in the process. So I like, if you can think about these as guiding your survey development, you'll be in really good shape. So for the criteria for methodology and measurement overview, it covers these different topics. Defining the purpose of the study, being very clear about that, involving stakeholders, developing a framework or a measurement guide. What is it? If you can think about the theory of what you're measuring, it will help you identify what questions to include in your survey. Building on existing research is really important. Writing good questions is hard. It takes a lot of time. So the extent that you can draw from other research and other surveys is great. Coordinate questionnaire report development. So think about how you're going to report the information can also inform how you design the data collection. We want to simplify the task of responding to the questions as much as possible. Even for people who have high literacy or are comfortable with surveys, nobody likes to work hard to complete a survey. So the easier we can make it, the better. You want to make sure you've given enough time to test your survey. And then minimizing total survey error, that's going back to that blue slide I just showed you, just being cognizant of all those errors that can sneak in. And as you're working, try to close those doors. Providing multiple administration modes. So for example, you might start with a web survey, and then for people who don't respond to that, you can switch to a telephone interview or an in-person interview or a paper interview. That's a great way to capture more people and decrease your response bias. And then translation into other languages. But even if you have a survey that's developed in English and you want to give it to a population that is very fluent in English, you still have to consider cultural considerations. So there may be words that just don't work in another culture, even in English. For the checklist for quantitative surveys, this document I approached it a little bit differently than Dr. Young's. It's more of a series of questions. How are you going to design your survey? What's your frequency of data collection? Is it longitudinal? Is it cross-sectional? What are your recruitment methods? What are your recruitment modes? How are you going to electronically capture the data? So it's really a series of questions going through each of these broader topics to make sure that as you're developing the survey, you're thinking about these things and you've answered those questions. So survey design considerations, how you identify and sample the population, how you're going to contact them, where are you going to find the questions, and just a note about finding questions. It's great to borrow questions, but please be aware of intellectual property restrictions or copyright and licensing. By all means, I don't want to dissuade you from using existing questionnaires, but you will need to investigate what the terms of use are and if there's any licensing required, and to make sure you have approval to reproduce somebody else's content. Pre-testing the survey is often a step that is skipped, and it's so important. It makes sure that the questions are working in the target population the way the investigator wants them to. Having some protocols and SOPs set up for your study on how you're going to collect the data. Fielding the survey preparation, training people, making sure your interviewers are trained, for example, making sure your data entry people are trained. And then launching and management tips are in there as well. And then analysis and planning. And one thing I also suggest is to think about your table shells and your poster, your paper, as you're designing the survey, because you want to make sure that you have the data you need to answer the questions, and mapping it out on a table or a figure is a really great strategy for making sure that you have the information you need. The third document in our resource toolkit is about writing new survey questions. So as I have taught survey research to graduate students for 20 years, and I also consult with a lot of our customers as the director of the Survey Research Center, I see a lot of very common, it seems there are certain things that a lot of people make certain mistakes. And so I've come up with a guide, these common pitfalls and how to avoid them. So a couple examples. So research response options to a question are not exhaustive or not mutually exclusive. So when they're not exhaustive, that means I want to pick an answer, but I don't see it on the survey. So that's where there's an option missing that I wanted to answer, but you didn't give me that choice. Another very common example is that they're not mutually exclusive. So I might have categories that overlap. Well, so example, how many fruits and vegetables do I eat? If the answer is 1 to 2 and the other answer is 2 to 3, well, if my answer is 2, which one do I pick? They're not mutually exclusive. So those are really common examples. Unclear intent is another one. So there's this concept of face validity. When I read the question, I should know what that question is applying to. And so that's another one that we often comment on. Confusing terminology. Healthcare is complicated, and we use big words sometimes that are not common in lay language. So making sure that people understand the wording. Insensitive wording, or wording that is not culturally or relevant appropriate, is another common thing. Double-barreled questions, where you have 2 questions in one. Leading or biased questions. So as the developer of the survey, you want to appear completely agnostic. So you wouldn't want to word a question of how much do you agree with this statement? Rather, you would say how much do you agree or disagree with this statement? So you're letting the respondent know you don't have you don't care what they think, you just want to know what they think. Mismatch between the questions and the response options, and then difficult navigation and problematic formatting. So those are all with examples in that document. And I'm going to switch now to recommended data elements across all projects. So one of our goals in MaMS is to ensure that we have harmonization of data collection across the projects. This is going to facilitate combining data together. And it also is going to make it easier on the statisticians when it comes to cleaning the data. So there's some basic information we would really like to be collected on all participants. And this is in line with the thinking of NIH funding. I know that iCCaRE is a DoD funded, but there's this concept of common data elements. Again, NIH wants to be able to compare across studies. And so this is a step towards that. We've come up with a tiered structure to distinguish from things that are really strongly recommended, suggested, and then could be quite unique. And this is also similar. We took some guidance from the C2 DREAM study. So our tier structure is as follows. So we have these, we don't insist on questions because you are, as the investigators, the subject matter experts and the experts on your population. So you will know what's the right way to ask the questions. But we strongly encourage that you at least consider the ones that we've compiled for those common data elements. So the blue ones are the ones that are strongly encouraged. So examples would be race and ethnicity. So that even though this is a consortium of prostate cancer in Black men, they can have multiple races. So we want to capture if there are other races, ethnicity, age, education, overall health, overall quality of life, things like that. Those are examples. Examples of sort of these middle, maybe potentially high value options are socioeconomic status, social determinants of health, maybe symptoms and treatment side effects, comorbidities. And then we have the smallest part, the orange part, which is really targeted just for one, and maybe one study is the only study that's using those questions. So for example, questions about a person's comfort with home-based chemotherapy. Well, that's only going to be relevant to a study looking at home-based cancer care. Same with acceptability of a virtual app. Those may be questions unique to a specific study. So when we share this with you, it's going to come as an Excel spreadsheet. And we have, I want to call out a couple of things on this spreadsheet. So we have whether it's recommended, and again, this is strongly encouraged that you consider asking this question. We have variable labels. So we would encourage you to use these labels that, again, will help us as we're combining data across studies. Now, if you do make any modification to a question that we provide, please give it a different label so that it's because it's a different question, and we don't want to combine questions that have some difference about them. And the last thing to call out is this coding. We've given numeric codes to each of the text answers, and that will again help us as we're analyzing the data and pooling the data across different studies. This is an example as well, as we have some questions where we had to tailor them for different populations. So we have a standard question pulled from a federal survey on educational attainment, and we had to adjust that for education in Africa and in the Caribbean because they have different systems of education. We're still testing those, so we're willing to change those as we learn more, but we do have a starting point that we would like people to consider when they're asking that question. We have a separate tab in that Excel workbook, which is dedicated to health history and health-related questions. So again, we have, whether it's recommended or not, the variable level, and then we have the question itself. And for some of them, we have the option depending on the target population. So in the US, we would use imperial units. In another country, we might use metric units. And so the investigators can choose which ones to present based on their population. In addition to the sociodemographic and the health questions, we have a recommended source of social determinants of health, and we refer people to this particular document that was generated by the U.S. Centers for Medicaid and Medicare. And you can pick and choose whichever questions you want. Anything created by the federal government in the U.S. is free to use and adapt as you want. You don't have to worry about permissions to use, but you should cite your source and your justification for any changes. And then we come to the study-specific patient-reported outcome measures. We have a very long list of those. And again, it's really up to the investigator to know on face validity and content validity what's going to be the best choice for their study. So for example, if you wanted to measure quality of life, you have several options that you can choose from. If you wanted to measure health literacy, there are several options to choose from. So please reach out to me. That's one of my expertise is in patient-reported outcome measures, and I can help work through identifying a patient-reported measure that will be fit for your purposes. Okay, and now I will hand it over to Dr. Oladiimbo.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Yutes. So I will be talking about considerations for studies to be conducted in Africa, what needs to be done, and the things we need to avoid in conducting studies in Africa. So for projects that and researches that we need to conduct in Africa, just like Dr. Yutes had said, it follows the same standard, the same data elements that have been said. However, because this is Africa and then we need to be culturally sensitive, we need to also, in adapting some of these instruments you use, we need to put into consideration some cultural elements when we are adapting. However, what we need to do, what we are trying to do across the regions is to ensure that all the data that we collect, are comparable, whether it's collected in Africa or in the US. We want to ensure that our data is comparable. So while we're trying to use the same instrument that is being used in the US, we're also trying to ensure that we are mindful of some of the different cultural issues in our settings. One other thing that we also need to put into consideration when we are conducting studies in Africa is that some of the instruments, the questionnaires that we use are in English and may not be we may not be able to use them just the way they are. We may need to translate them into languages within our setting so that individuals within the different communities where we are conducting the study can be able to participate. And so for MaMS, we have a standard of good practices for translation of questionnaires, documents, whether it's qualitative or quantitative documents that we want to use, whether it's an interview guide, whether it's a quantitative questionnaire. We have a document for good practices that we need to follow when we are doing that. Another thing that we also need to consider when we are also doing collecting data in Africa is that the elements of the data that we are collecting in Africa, whether they are for clinical studies or whether they are for surveys, they have to follow, they must follow good research ethics. We must consider proper research ethics when we are collecting data in Africa. We don't have to say because it's Africa, then we don't follow it has to follow the correct research ethics that is globally acceptable. The next slide. Okay, so this document here talks about cross-cultural recommendations, guidelines for conducting studies, and is an NIH document. And one of the things that this document is talking about is that there are several methods by which we can adapt an instrument, a questionnaire, in our own setting. However, the process of adaptation, while we try to keep fidelity, when we are adapting, is important. Most of the time, people confuse adaptation with validation. The process the two are two different things. Adapting an instrument is different from validating the instrument. When we have adapted an instrument, we must go through the process of validating that instrument and ensuring that the instrument is measuring exactly what it says it wants to measure. Okay, so a very good example is the physical activity instruments. Some of the activities that are listed in that instrument, the global physical activity instrument, or the international physical activity instrument. Some of the activities that are highlighted in that instrument may not really be specific within our environment. So while we want to adapt that instrument, we also want to be sure that it is actually measuring what it's saying it's measuring. If not, at the end of the day, it's either you're going to be overestimating people's physical activity level or you're going to be underestimating their physical activity level. So we can all go through this instrument at our leisure time so that we can see what this document is talking about. The next slide. So this particular slide talks about when we are doing a translation of our instrument, of our questionnaire, so that it can be culturally acceptable within our setting. That, like I said, there are different methods for translation. One of the things I've discovered is that, yes, now a lot of people use the AI, the ChatGPT for translating instruments. But one of the limitations I've seen, especially with some of our languages in Nigeria, is that yes, some of the wordings that the AI or the ChatGPT gives you may not be things that you are familiar with, or things that is really the words may not really be commonly used within your setting. So even you, as the researcher going out to collect the data, you are not familiar with those words, and then it's difficult for you to even administer that instrument. So we recommend that if you are going to do a translation for your instrument, it's that you use the facet model. The facet model talks about the fact that you get two or more two translators that are independent of each other. The two of them should be bilingual. That means they should be able to speak that local language and also speak English. And then they will then translate to the local language which in which you want to administer the instrument. And after that translation has been done, you will get another independent translator to check the two translations and be sure that there is no discrepancy between the two, that the two translations given by the translators are quite are similar to each other, and then it's reviewed by another English speaking person, and then you do a back translation of the instrument to the original, to English, and then you compare that back translation to the original instrument, and you check if the wordings are similar, if they are both asking the same thing, and then you do some reviews, and eventually you can do a pilot to test that instrument. The other one is doing the TRAP-D model. We can also use the TRAP-D model. In the TRAP-D model, you have two or more independent translators doing the translation for you, and then afterwards there is a review of what they have done by another independent reviewer, and after then you have to do to adjudge if what is reviewed, compares with the drafts that was made. And then you also do a back translation. You do a pre-test to check if how the instruments will work with the population. You take comments, places, you notes questions where you feel that respondents did not really understand what the questions were saying. You get feedbacks, and then the document is reviewed again, and then the document is ready. However, if you are doing a group translation, that is if you are doing an individual translation. If you are doing a group translation, then you will need some expert panel to help you sit down together, look at the instruments. Everybody picks each word and then translate them. So, for example, one of the things, the iCCaRE has about 3 different studies going on in Africa presently. We have the cancer avoidance studies, we have the CAPCA studies, then we also have the prostate cancer survivorship in the Francophone countries. And so, while we are trying to see that we standardize this instrument and ensure that the instrument is that we are adapting the instrument being used that has been used in the US. At the same time, we're trying to ensure that these instruments are validated. So if you are doing a group translation, you have to do an expert panel where the experts gives the correct interpretation to translation to each of those words of the instrument in the instrument, and then you then do a lay panel, also looking at it and then reviewing it before you then adapt that particular instrument for you to be able to use it in the community. So one of the services that we do in MaMS is to ensure that apart from getting our instruments standardized, we have a center here in Abeokuta where we help with translating some of our instruments. The African Behavioral Research Center, we do a lot of translations, especially to our indigenous languages that we can then use within our different settings for our different projects that we are conducting. I think this brings us to the end of our presentation for today. Yes, the floor is then open for discussions.
All right, thank you to our presenters. Do we have any questions? Please feel free to put any questions or comments in the chat. Okay, we're getting some really great accolades in the chat. Right, we do have a question. And it is, what have you seen as common errors made by investigators that can be avoided?
Thank you for that question. I think the most common one would be not reaching out to us early. So I think that's probably where we find it's the most challenging, because they might have spent a lot of time coming up with a survey with a lot of questions and like demographic questions or health questions that are not standardized. And then we come along and say, oh, you really should be using these, and they have to redo everything. So I think for iCCaRE, that's possibly the most one of the most common errors that I've seen. And I get from a quantitative perspective, I don't know if to put Dr. Young on the spot, if she's got a common error that she's seen for qualitative work.
So I think definitely involving us early, even as early as when you're writing the proposal, because the checklist can be very useful to make sure that you've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. The other thing is to actually use the resources that we've given you, rather than developing your own work and then coming back and we're saying, no, you really need to rephrase your, say, interview guide questions this way, when that's part of the document that we've given you. So make use of the resources we've given you, and make use of the people resources that you have really early in the process, where we're happy to help.
Thank you. We do have another question. This one is for Dr. Olodoyinbo. At what point do you do validation of those translated instruments?
Okay, thank you very much. So one of the things that we need to do is you can do to do a pilot with those instruments. When you do a pilot, you'll be able to get feedbacks from those who are administering the instruments, some of the difficulties they encounter, some of the comments from the respondents. That will help you to go back and make some corrections on the instrument. And before you, by the time you have read all those comments and all the feedbacks, it will help you to know what to do with that instrument, where to make adjustments where it is necessary.
And if I can add a comment to that too, because this came up with one of our APP studies. So it's a pilot study, so the resources are a little bit more modest. So for that one, we can't do a really, what I would say, like a full-blown validation where you're getting empirical data and making sure the scores are performing as hypothesized. But at a minimum, if you've got limited resources, at least establish content validity. So do get some experts to review your survey, look at do a good translation process, and test it on a handful of people from the target population to make sure that they're interpreting that translated question as intended by the investigators. So if you can establish content validity, then I think that's a bare minimum, and then you can take that questionnaire into your actual study if you have limited resources.
Thank you. We have another question. If we are publishing our research reports, do we need to work with your core?
I'm so glad you asked that, because as a resource, we're here to help you disseminate your results as well. And so we really haven't been engaged as much, so that we can help make sure your methods are described properly, that you're interpreting your results properly. We can help look at your poster. So yes, we should be seeing more of that from our teams, and I hope that with the liaisons embedded in the iCCaRE teams, they can say, okay, I see that you're about ready to publish something. Involve me in that review. So yes, thank you for that. And also with grant writing, we haven't been involved with the actual preparation of any intra or extramural grants. We can also look at the methods for that at that time. So yeah, we are a resource for you. So please reach out to us.
Thank you all. Do we have any more questions? Making sure I didn't miss any. Oh, we do have another question. Would you please share what tools are used to analyze the open-ended questions and surveys? Also, to what degree generative AI influenced the qualitative data analysis?
Okay. Great questions. So let's take the first one. So there are data analysis tools on the market, such as In Vivo or Atlas TI. There's some other ones. Those packages have a pretty high learning curve. So there's really nothing that will analyze your data for you. Those software packages are to help you manage your data. And if you're collecting a lot of data, it's really useful to invest in some of that software. It's not cheap, so you've got to have the resources to do it, and you've got to train people to use it. So for the second question, this is a huge topic in qualitative research right now. Those of us who've been doing this for a long time have basically said, don't use generative AI to interpret your data, because we want the thinking work to be done by the research team and the PI and those who are involved in looking at the data from various perspectives. Even though we are saying don't do it, people are doing it. So I'm teaching a class right now, and it's like, no, don't use AI to analyze your data. And then students come back and they say, well, I just ran it through this AI program to see what it came up with. So right now we are not sure or certain that AI is going to give us useful results that would be better than the human factor analysis. I think that the genie's out of the bottle, though, and we're not going to put it back in, and AI is here to stay. And we have to learn how to use AI in a responsible manner. So I'm happy to have that conversation with you and to give you some articles because it's a hot topic right now.
Thank you, Dr. Young. We do have another question. What is the best way to reach out on further grants?
I would say the same approach to maybe reach out to Jeffrey and have Jeffrey connect you with us. Again, Jeffrey can help keep us on task and make sure that we're not forgetting something if there's a deadline that we need to meet, because sometimes we'll have a slow month and sometimes we'll be really busy. So we want to make sure that we have assistance in making sure that we're being responsive. So I think that would be the best way. Just reach out through him for a consultation, and we'll get somebody aligned with your grant based on what you're needing, and that liaison can help you flesh out any methods and measurement aspects of the grant.
Thank you, Dr. Yost. We have another question. It may be possible that IRB could request a modification to some of the questions. If so, can we resubmit our revisions to the core?
Absolutely, yeah. So we want to make sure that we have seen your final version and that we kind of give you the feedback on that final version. Again, it's going to be recommendations and suggestions for you, not insistence on changes. So yes, if there's any changes, we want to make sure that it hasn't created a new problem in terms of intent of the question or leading or whatever. So absolutely, feel free. We're there for you through the entire lifespan of your study. So any revisions, we're happy to look at.
Thank you. We have another question, very popular. Is it possible to request for MaMS core expertise in case of personal research at all?
So I think you're asking like for a non-iCCaRE project. If that's the question?
I think so.
Yeah, if you're a Mayo employee, I'm available at all times as the director of the Survey Research Center for any questions and consultations. I can make myself available for as well to external collaborators for a little bit. I can't give too much of my time away, but for quick questions I can, and I'll let Dr. Young and Dr. Oladipo speak on their availability for non-iCCaRE questions.
So I would be open to if you've got questions, we can communicate by email or do a Zoom chat. Again, it would be very limited because that's outside the scope of my contract. But I'm always happy to share what I know with especially new investigators trying to get started. So,
great.
Yeah, stay with me.
Thank you. If there are any more questions, to make sure I didn't miss any. All right, if there aren't any more questions or comments, we can conclude our webinar for today. Thank you all again, Dr. Yost, Dr. Young, and Dr. Oladipo for a great presentation.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you everyone for joining us. We will be back again next month at the same time.